The discussion topic for today is intercultural communication. Your objectives: to understand cultural differences, to understand the meaning of culture and intercultural communication, to recognize ineffective intercultural communication, and to identify ways to improve intercultural communication. What is culture? What is intercultural communication? Culture is a shared system of meanings derived from the environment in which people live. It is a mindset, people's response to their physical and human environment, a survival mechanism passed from generation to generation. A transmitted system of values, ideas, and understandings. These pictures are from Egypt, so I have given you a snapshot of various types of activities. We have major cities, and then we have agricultural pictures in which pretty much the pace of things have been the same throughout the last hundreds, if not thousands of years. The two types of cultures are high context and low context. High context refers to little is said. Much of the communication is inferred. So the information that is received in a high context culture, it has to be inferred. In other words, one has to read in between the lines to get the meaning. In a low context culture, much is said. Most of the communication is explicitly spelled out. To determine whether a culture is high context or low context, one can look at the government of that country. If information flows freely from the governments, well then usually that culture is low context. However, if the information is a bit subdued or all the information is not provided, probably that culture is high context. Cultural differences manifest themselves in various ways. First, we have individualism versus collectivism. In a culture that is individualistic, the individual, okay, so in other words, the employee, and the goals, the work that an individual employee completes is either valued, okay, so in other words, either that individual fails or succeeds based on his or her quality of work. Whereas in a collectivistic community or society, everyone in that group is looked upon as one entity. So either everyone in that group fails or everyone in that group succeeds. Then we have time. So how is one's time being spent? Time is also divided into monochronic and polychronic, and we'll take a look at that in a few moments. We have business versus personal relationships, and many times time and business and personal relationships fall hand in hand. So perhaps much time will be spent getting to know you better before a relationship a business relationship is taken upon. Then we have power relationships. In many cultures, you must communicate with the person in charge, not his or her assistant. So it really is important to know who is in charge and who you need to communicate with. Then we have truth. Usually in our culture, when someone smiles or when someone nods in the affirmative, we take that as that person understands what we are saying. But in other cultures, you cannot take that as being the truth, because more than likely that person may not agree with you or even understand your point of view, but as a way not to embarrass you, that person will not say anything negative to you. And then we have food, and food is definitely a big cultural differences. And many times a business meeting will take place during lunch or dinner, so you need to be aware of differences in food and what you are willing to eat and what you are not willing to eat. This picture was taken in Ghana, West Africa, and this is a mother and son, and they are making a dish called fufu, and the dish is made out of a grain and water, basically. And so the mother kneads the dough and the son pounds the dough. And so it really is quite something to see, because they work quite fast, and the son has to be really careful not to pound his mother's hand. So a friend and I were walking through this village, and we saw them making this dish, and so they were very friendly, and they did ask us to join them for dinner. And my friend did eat the dish, but I did not, because usually this dish, the fufu, the dough, is placed on top of beef, and I don't eat beef. So I had to explain to them that, thank you for your hospitality, but I explained to them why I don't eat beef. And they were probably a bit disappointed, but the way that I communicated with them, they were able to understand my position and my, the reasons why I did not want to partake of the dish. And I was very careful not to offend them, but more, it was really, it was more my culture and how I felt about eating beef, and that is why I could not partake of this dish. They were very understanding, and that is really, the major point of this discussion is to let you know that, it's very easy to communicate with other cultures. You just have to do so effectively, just as in any culture. In our culture, you must have to communicate effectively to get your point across, and you have to be sensitive. Intercultural communication is the ability to communicate sensitively with people from other cultures and countries based on an understanding of cultural differences. And that is very important. So you have to make sure that you understand the culture that you're going to visit or that you're going to conduct business in, so that you are sensitive to the way that people communicate, so that you're aware of your communication style, and that you are aware of their style as well. Intercultural nonverbal communication manifests itself through body language, gestures, space, time, clothing, and colors. So you have to be aware of one's body language, aware of it, and be able to read it, because once again, you may think that someone may agree with you because he or she is smiling and nodding in the affirmative, whereas, like I said previously, that's not necessarily the case. So you do have to be aware of body language and gestures. Also space, and this refers to personal space. In many high context cultures, being 2 feet apart or less is is definitely the way to conduct business, and it's very comfortable. Whereas in our culture, 5 feet is very comfortable. So you have to make sure that you sensitively communicate to that person that you prefer to sit a little further away, or you can suggest another seating arrangement. Again, being very sensitive. Time, and we can divide time into monochronic and polychronic. We have clothing and colors, making sure that you wear the appropriate clothing, making sure that the colors that you wear are not offensive to that particular culture. Okay, so time. Monochronic refers to doing one thing at a time. It also refers to increments of time. So in other words, giving yourself 15 minutes to complete a task or 30 minutes to complete a task. Whereas polychronic refers to doing several things at once. And it also refers to family time. So devoting one's time to one's family, or perhaps talking about one's family before business is completed. Okay, so things like that you want to make sure that you are aware of. Whereas here, we are expected, if a class begins at 9 o'clock or a meeting begins at 9 o'clock, we expect that meeting or class to begin at 9 o'clock. Whereas in other countries, particularly high context cultures, a meeting that is scheduled for 9 o'clock may not begin until 9:30 because time is being spent discussing one's family or chit-chatting about other issues other than business. Okay, so let's see how interculturally savvy you are by completing the intercultural communication game. Dogs are considered bad luck or unclean in the U.S., Taiwan, North Africa, or Japan. This is a picture of dogs that I took in Egypt, and these were the only dogs that I saw, so I had to take a picture of them. And I traveled Egypt from north, south, east, and west. And I saw quite a few cats, but these are the only dogs that I saw. So the answer is North Africa. People of the Muslim religion consider a dog to be either a sign of bad luck or a symbol of uncleanness. So just imagine, for those of you who have dogs, and perhaps you are in a North African country, and you are discussing with your counterpart in this North African country, let's say Egypt or Morocco, about, you're talking about your dog, talking about your family, or you're talking about your dog. You mentioned that your dog is a part of your family and your dog lives inside and he jumps on your bed. So you have all of these stories about your dog, and which is fine, but just remember that your counterpart in North Africa thinks of dogs as a sign of bad luck or uncleanness. Rely more on nonverbal communication and less on circumstances and implied meanings to convey meaning. U.S., Taiwan, Greece, or Africa. We're looking at Africa as a whole. Well, hopefully all of you got this question correct, because it is U.S., and that definition was the definition of a low context culture. The most naive about other cultures and the way they do business. U.S., Mexico, Arabic nations, South Korea. U.S. And that is why we are having this discussion, even though it's very brief and your book only covers one chapter, but still it is a very important discussion to have. You are presumed guilty until proven innocent. The U.S., Mexico, Egypt, and Spain. Hopefully it is not the U.S. The answer is Mexico. So when you travel to Mexico, you want to be really careful. To say no, they move their right hand. It's U.S., Bulgaria, Japan, Sicily. In Japan, information is conveyed through body language and tone of voice. They move their right hands to say no. In Bulgaria, they nod up and down to say no. In Sicily, they raise their chins. So be very careful when you go to Bulgaria, because a yes, the way that we know a yes, and we nod our heads up and down, okay, really you're saying no. So be very careful. It goes to show that no nonverbal communication has the same meaning throughout the world. A handshake is a single stroke. U.S., France, Spain, or Mexico. France. A handshake in Spain lasts 5 to 7 strokes, and pulling away too soon may be seen as rejection. A handshake in the U.S. is approximately 3 strokes. Decisions are made quickly with the highest ranking executive, U.S., Latin America, and again, that's kind of as a whole, France and Pakistan. The answer is Pakistan. In the U.S., top employees decide the main points and leave the details to lower level employees. In Latin America, decisions are made slowly after much discussion. France favors an atmosphere of formal hospitality and start negotiations by mistrusting the other party. In Japan, a negotiation team arrives at a consensus through elaborate, time-consuming process. Business letters open with a reference to the business relationship and close with a compliment to the recipient. The U.S., Japan, Sweden, and Germany. And the answer is Germany. Status is shown with materialism. U.S., France, Sicily, Germany. The answer is U.S. Out of every 7 people, 1 person speaks a language other than his/her native language when at home. U.S., Sweden, Germany, Japan. In the U.S., Spanish is the most commonly spoken language after English, followed by French, German, Italian, and Chinese. However, in most other countries, almost every person speaks at least 1 additional language. Business executives need to stand about 5 feet apart during conversations. U.S., Germany, Japan, and Arabic nations, again, that is as a whole. And the answer is U.S., and I gave you a hint earlier in the discussion. So, intercultural communication. Remember that the successful intercultural communicator is aware that his or her preferred values and behaviors are influenced by culture and are not necessarily correct. So your way is not necessarily the only way. Flexible and open to change, sensitive to verbal and non-verbal behavior, sensitive to differences among individuals within a culture. And this is very important because this discussion has been a general view of high context versus low context cultures. But remember that everyone within a culture is an individual. So you want to make sure that you are aware of overall cultural differences, but not necessarily do those cultural differences have to be applied to individuals within that culture. Okay, just the same is very true for our culture. Aware of the values, beliefs, and practices in other cultures. So to be successful, you need to make sure that you adhere to these 5 criteria. Now, this discussion is not meant to lead you to believe that you should give away all of your cultural upbringing when you go to other cultures. That is not what I'm saying. But it's very important for you to be aware that your way of doing things may not translate well to other cultures. So you need to make sure that you are flexible and open to change. Okay, and hopefully that person, your counterpart, will be as well. Okay, but you need to be flexible because things change rapidly in other cultures. So you need to be flexible and open to that change to be successful. Once again, you need to make sure that you are sensitive as well so that you are aware. And I think learning about other cultures will make you sensitive and aware of what's going on. So I hope that you have enjoyed our discussion on intercultural communication.